Joining us here in the studio, Alexandru Hudisteanu. He's a maritime security expert and a military and diplomacy analyst. And we have from Iran's capital, Foad Izadi. He's an associate professor at the University of Tehran. Welcome to both of you. If I could start with Foad in Tehran, in Iran. According to this statement now, the Iranian military saying it's hit an American destroyer. That would mean the end of this ceasefire?
You know, ceasefire started on April 7th and ended in April 8th when the United States blockaded Iranian ports. You know, under international law, under US law, blockades are acts of war. And then this was 24 hours after the Iranian delegation returned from Islamabad to Tehran. And then 24 hours before the next round of talks in Islamabad, the United States shot at an Iranian ship. You know, Trump tells this story almost every day, how accurate the American missile hit the ship's engine. And they took over that ship like pirates. And this is not the analysis of an Iranian professor. This is what Trump said. He said they acted like pirates.
But Foad, my question now is, since that incident, we had some kind of, I guess we can call it lull in terms of direct military contact, although you're right, according to foundational documents of international law, a blockade is an act of war. But in terms of direct contact, we didn't have that until now. From your understanding of the Iranian position and perspective, is the ceasefire over?
Attacking an Iranian ship's engine is an act of war as well. So this is not the first time that you have someone shooting. United States shot at Iran some days ago. And then yesterday you have been covering Trump's tweet that he is going to escort ships out of the Strait of Hormuz. As you know, no insurance company is going to allow any ships to go through the Strait of Hormuz when the Strait of Hormuz is a war zone, with or without American ships. There are no volunteers for that. These ships are not guinea pigs to be shot at by either side. So the analysis here is that that tweet was designed for this new round of U.S. ships coming into a Strait of Hormuz. So what the Iranian side did, they published that map because the Strait of Hormuz is in Iranian territorial waters and contiguous waters. The Iranian side is telling the U.S., if you pass through that line, that means you're coming in, and that means that you may be shot at.
Okay, and that's
apparently what
it appears. Yes, that appears what has happened according to Fast News Agency. Alexandru, what posture can we expect the Americans to take now, if indeed one of their ships has been hit?
First of all, I think we should wait to see if there's any
confirmation
from the US side. If a ship has been hit, this is not something you can easily hide, and most likely they will come up with a communique, with a confirmation or not. Second of all, we have to understand these parties are still at war, and for sure for Iran, the leverage of the Strait of Hormuz is the actual only leverage they have for these negotiations. In the absence of a Strait of Hormuz arresting, basically, which they did, I don't think Iran would have proper negotiation tools or proper weight at the negotiation table. So obviously Iran will try to defend this with everything got. Even the map they show, it's actually a little bit, how would I say, excessive, because if we're discussing international law, the fact that you're delineating two entries and exits to the strait, also in the territorial waters of other states, that be Oman, from what I can notice, and the UAE at that point, and arguing that the strait is in contiguous waters of Iran, the contiguous waters of Iran, if they're not continuing all the way to the territorial waters of the other states. So the whole Strait of Hormuz is split between three states. Entries and exits are Iran on one side and UAE on the entries and exits, and then you have Oman on the central part. Even the mining of territorial water of another state could be considered act of war, which Iran has been at least claiming to do, to some degree of plausibility. So discussing international
Iran
law,
hasn't actually said it's mined the waters of Oman.
No, it says it's a mine risk there.
It said that this is an area of danger, just to be clear.
Yes.
But from a military naval perspective, as someone who's familiar with that side of operations, is the US in a position now to escalate a naval engagement, or is it more likely to avoid that as more of a vulnerability for it and engage with airstrikes and other forms of engagement?
So the strikes that US did can be done from aircrafts and also can be done with strike missile, with strike precision missile from the destroyers. The destroyers have one of the capability, they have its strike capability. So the platform from which the strike can happen, that's really relevant at this point. The thing is US trying to respond in kind in case this attack happened, and it will be a limited attack, or it will be an active phase of the war. I think right now we are in a position where there is a high risk of miscalculation from both sides, and obviously Iran would probably have reacted as such to a trial of US to try to do any type of escorting of the ships, which again, the message from President Trump said actually guiding ships through the strait. That can mean many things. Also, some form of advisory or NCAGs, what they call naval guidance, coordination guidance for shipping, can be advisory, can be anything of the sort, not necessarily a direct escorting through the strait. So what we see now is basically Iran defending what it sees as its only negotiating point.
It's leverage.
It's leverage.
Right,
and if US can decouple this, like you basically open an onion and take little by little from the actual enforcement
then
potential, then Iran loses its leverage.
Foad, is that the point here that's at stake for Iran now, is really preserving the leverage it has, and the most strongest of which is control over the Strait of Hormuz?
It is true that that is one of Iran's leverages, and it's also true that Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles altogether. Under international law, conventional law of seas, you get 12 miles of territorial waters, 12 miles of contiguous waters. Under international law, contiguous waters of a country, a coastal country, the laws of that country should be respected. You add 12 plus 12, that's 24, that's more than 21. So what the Iranian side is doing is that they're saying that we are going to use the fact of our geography, the fact that the Strait of Hormuz is just 21 miles, and we are going to exercise the right under international law to make sure that a country that has attacked Iran and has killed more than 3,500 civilians will not be able to go through this strait. And in order for the US to realize that coming near the strait would be a mistake, they're sending
let me jump
signals,
in, Foad, and
publishing maps to tell them don't come any further than you have done.
But Foad, to Alexandru's point, we know that territorial waters is 12 nautical miles. The Strait of Hormuz is over 20, about 22 nautical miles. So some of that water would be Omani territorial waters, right?
Yeah,
so trying to impose a sort of exclusion zone on both the Iranian and Omani territorial waters would not sit. I know that even with customary international law, which Iran does recognize, although it hasn't ratified the UN Convention on Law of the Seas, right?
Let me repeat this. These waters are Iranian and Omani territorial waters and contiguous waters.
So how can it impose its will on the Omani side?
Oman is in the same position as Iran, but nobody is shooting at Oman. Nobody has killed 3,500 civilians in Oman. It's the United States that has attacked Iran. This is a war zone, and these waters are Iran's and Oman's contiguous waters and territorial waters.
That's true, Foad. The US is the party that 25 UN experts have called launching an illegal war, but the map which the IRGC is publishing does show some kind of exclusion zone that extends into both Omani and UAE waters. That was the point that I was posing to you of how can Iran claim international law in controlling that side of the waterway. I'll give you a chance to finish the thought. Go ahead, Foad.
Yeah, you know what Iran is telling the other side is that because we have war, and even the conventional law of seas is designed for peacetime. Since we have war, what Iran is saying is that Iran is telling the other side, is actually helping the other side to realize that where they can roam around and where they cannot. And the map that you showed on the screen is Iran's way of helping the other side to not cross that line, because crossing that line in the minds of Iranians means that you're going to the Strait of Hormuz, and during wartime, American ships, Israeli ships should avoid that. UAE ships, ships of other countries, they have military ships, they have other activities. They can, of course, when you go to a war zone, you may want to coordinate with the warring parties.
Right.
But I don't think we have had any statement on the Iranian side warning UAE not to use its territorial waters. The same thing is true with regard to Oman.
All right, I'm getting some more lines in here, Alexandru, and I realize you may not have just seen this, but these are the statements being put out now from CENTCOM, the US Central Command. And what they're talking about is conditions for orderly transit of the Strait of Hormuz, saying vessels choosing to transit the Strait of Hormuz should consider routing via Oman territorial waters south of the traffic separation scheme. Now, there's a lot of details here, but it does sound like they are trying to coordinate some kind of passage for shipping that goes through Omani waters. Despite the news that we've just heard being reported by Iranian news agencies that an American destroyer has been hit. How do we reconcile the two?
I would like first to clarify something because it's important.
Right.
We have heard about discussion about what maritime law is. First of all, if Iran, as a signatory but not ratifier of the convention, talks about contiguous zone, then they have to decide which law they respect, because contiguous zone is something enshrined in the UNCLOS, which is the law of the sea, and not customary law. Second of all, when you have these bodies of water, when the water doesn't allow for the full type of specific juridical regime, you have what they call a mediation. Either they apply a median line, that means the water is split equally between what they will be baselines, and then that means territorial waters of a state end up with contacting territorial water of a state, or contiguous zone or economic exclusive zone. In the sense of the strait, at the closest point where you have 21 miles, that's exactly territorial waters of Oman and then territorial waters of Iran. The traffic separation scheme for this middle part, for this corner part in the strait, was actually completely in the Omani territorial waters. Now, the fact that another state tries to impose a different regime while mentioning at the same time some parts of a treaty that they are not respecting in force, if they want to respect territorial waters, they should respect also transit passage, which even under war condition has to be assured for non-combatants.
So just simplifying for viewers who might be a little bit lost on the United Nations Convention on Law of the Seas and customary law and all the things you're mentioning, you're basically saying you can't pick and choose.
You cannot pick and choose.
Right.
You have to.
Let me
now going back. Article 17
going back.
Okay, go ahead, Foad. I'll give you a chance to come back in. Go ahead, Foad. Briefly, though, please, sir.
Listen, we have read these laws. We have PhDs. We know what's going on. We know the country's rights. We read English. Article 17 of the Convention on Law of Seas. It says innocent passage. When you kill 3,500 civilians in a country, you are not doing anything innocent. Article 19 describes what innocence is, and it says you should not threaten the security of the coastal state. Iran is a coastal state. United States, Romania, Japan are not coastal states in the Persian Gulf.
Right.
These are very simple things.
All right, Foad. I think
yes, but at the same time, transit passage means ships are allowed to pass as long as they are not included in the belligerent side. Now,
innocent.
A lot of the ships right now in the strait, and a lot of the ships are actually blocked from using the strait, and they have nothing to do with this conflict whatsoever. Coming back to your question.
I think we need to move. Can we move the discussion on now? I think the viewers have heard both sides of this perspectives on this point, but I'm more interested right now on the announcements we're getting from CENTCOM directing vessels through Omani territorial waters. I mean, what is the practicality of this? So I spoke to a captain of a ship earlier who said, none of us are going to be heroes. They're going to try and rush through a Strait of Hormuz that has any risk for their ships.
So basically what US is doing now is trying to signal that it's in a capacity to somehow defend a specific area. What we need to understand that destroyers, Arleigh Burke class destroyers, their main function initially was air defense bubbles. They were creating around the ships some air defense bubbles with their weapons on board, especially the standard missiles, which can range up to a few hundred kilometers in the higher versions. That means what we see here, maybe US will not be willing to basically escort one-on-one ships. They might be willing to enact basically an area in the strait that could be covered by these air defense bubbles.
Just to point out another line here from the CENTCOM saying maritime security threat level in the Strait of Hormuz remains critical. It's very difficult to see how anyone's going to want to rush into a critical threat level.
That's the point. And this is what has always have been, and this is the point that Iran has banked its whole strategy on. There is a disconnection between military understanding of what security is and what civilian commercial shipping will accept. So most captains will not necessarily be willing to go through as long as there's no confidence. And the confidence is not there yet.
I'm sorry, we really do have to end it there because we are out of time. Let me thank both our guests, Foad Izadi, Associate Professor of the University of Tehran, and political analyst joining us from the Iranian capital. Thank you very much, sir. And Alexandru Hudisteanu, military and diplomatic analyst and maritime security expert. Thank you.
Thank you.